That night, the sky over Lydia stretched wide like a dark sea scattered with gems. A cold wind swept over the palace towers, carrying the scent of incense from a nearby temple. In the war room of the palace, royal advisors and priests sat cross-legged, staring at a map of the battlefield laid out on a stone table. King Alyattes, a stern but sharp-minded ruler, gazed out the window, waiting for one man, Thales of Miletus. Whispers ran among the nobles. This man could read the stars as if they were a secret scroll. He was not a soldier, nor a priest, but a star traveler, the first astronomer capable of predicting the movements of the heavens through calculation, not myth. But tonight was not about science. It was about war. Lydia was preparing to face the Medes, their fierce eastern rivals. The armies were ready, but the stars gave strange signs. The royal priests were afraid, believing that an eclipse would be a bad omen. The king was uneasy because the fate of a war could shift in an instant. If the sky turned dark, Thales entered the chamber wearing a simple robe, his eyes sharp. All eyes turned to him as if he held the key to the future. He looked through the window at the eastern sky and smiled faintly. "If tonight the stars move as I've calculated," he said softly, "then the heavens themselves will answer the king's question." Not everyone welcomed a man who could command the sky with logic. To the priests, Thales was more than a scholar. He was a threat to spiritual power. To the king, he was a double-edged sword, a savior or a danger. King Alyattes was not a pious man, but one who distrusted chance. He believed in tactics, strategy, and calculation. But when the rumor of an eclipse spread, even he couldn't ignore the collective fear of his people. An eclipse is not just a heavenly event, one priest warned. It is a sign of the gods' wrath. The soldiers grew restless. The people whispered in the markets, and morale faltered before a single sword was drawn. Thales had been summoned not just as an astronomer, but because the king knew whoever controlled the meaning of the sky controlled the direction of war. He wanted certainty, not prayers, not myth. Thales stood before the throne. "The sky is not angry," he said plainly. "It moves according to calculation." A simple sentence, yet it sent a shiver through the chamber. Priests felt insulted, advisors were confused, and the king was deep in thought. The king stared at Thales. "If you are right," he said slowly, "then I will make the sky my ally. But if you are wrong, the people will turn against me." Thales knew the stakes. He wasn't just calculating the path of the sun. He was gambling with his life at the table of power. The day of battle came. Two mighty armies, Lydia and Media, faced each other on the banks of the Thales River. Dust filled the air, war drums thundered, and the sun blazed overhead. No one realized the sky was preparing. The most dramatic spectacle in the history of ancient warfare. Thales had calculated that the sun would be swallowed by shadow that day. No soldier believed him except the king. But just as the first cries of war rang out, the sunlight began to fade. No clouds appeared, yet the sky dimmed. The Medes froze. The Lydians lowered their weapons. Even the horses shrieked in fear. A total eclipse shrouded the battlefield. For many, it was the end of the world. Priests on both sides panicked, but King Alyattes remained calm. He glanced at Thales standing behind the lines. A silent signal passed between them. This scientific prophecy had just become a diplomatic weapon. Moments later, the fighting stopped. No one dared defy the will of the heavens. A war that should have ended in bloodshed turned into negotiation. The eclipse shook the ancient world. In the eerie silence, the two kings, Alyattes of Lydia and King of Media, stepped down from their war chariots. Soldiers formed a circle, their eyes still fixed on the darkened sky. "The heavens have spoken," murmured a Median priest. But Alyattes knew it wasn't the gods speaking. It was Thales' calculations. He seized the moment. The Lydian king approached his rival not with a sword, but with an offer of peace. "If even the heavens ask us to stop, who are we to defy them?" he declared. Caesars, shaken and awed, agreed. In an instant, a great war turned into a peace treaty. The priest tried to reclaim the narrative, saying it was the will of the gods. But the king knew the truth. The man who had stopped the sky was one astronomer from Miletus. Thales stood far behind, watching as two kingdoms negotiated. He was not a soldier, yet his knowledge had altered the course of history. This bloodless victory was not good news for everyone. In the temples, the priests grew uneasy. For centuries, they had controlled the interpretation of the sky. They called eclipses the wrath of gods, and the people obeyed. But now, an outsider had predicted it more accurately than their prayers. Thales was summoned to the central temple. The high priest glared at him. "You have changed the meaning of the sky," he said. "Do you think the gods will remain silent?" Thales replied calmly, "The sky does not need interpretation. It needs calculation," a sentence that sounded like a direct challenge to old power. The priests understood. If science replaced myth, their influence would fade. But they could not deny what had happened. The eclipse had come exactly as Thales foretold. Days after the peace treaty, Thales was summoned again, this time not to the war room but to the palace gardens. The night was quiet. The stars like golden sand scattered on black silk. "It was not my sword that ended the war," Alyattes said softly. "It was your stars." He handed Thales a pouch of gold coins. But more dangerous than gold, the king gave him trust. In the ancient world, the trust of a king could make someone an ally or a threat. Alyattes knew that with his knowledge of the heavens, Thales could shape the fate of a kingdom. "Your stars are powerful, Thales," the king warned. "But remember, the sky can make you dangerous too." From that night on, Thales was no longer just an astronomer from Miletus. He was the man who stopped a war with a calculation. News spread quickly from Lydia to Ionia, from Media to Egypt. Merchants, nobles, and kings began to understand. Knowledge was not just a way to understand the world, it was a way to control it. Thales began teaching how to read the stars, predict eclipses, calculate the harvest seasons, and navigate the seas. His science made sailors bolder, farmers better prepared, and kingdoms stronger. But with power came fear. A man who could read the heavens could also influence destiny. In the shadows of temples and palace corridors, whispers grew. Priests and old nobles felt their power shaking. They had long ruled through their interpretation of the heavens. But Thales, with his astronomical calculations, was changing everything. "If one man can read the sky better than us," a priest whispered, "then soon, the king will have no need for us." Some began to plot against Thales, not with swords, but with rumors, accusations, and fear. They called him a sorcerer who had bewitched the sun, not studied it. The same sky that gave him power now became a weapon against him. Thales knew he was being watched. But he also knew one unshakable truth. The sky belonged to no one. In his observatory tower, he looked up at the stars once more, the place where answers always lay. "As long as the stars keep moving," he said to himself, "no one can lie to the sky forever." King Alyattes, though wary of Thales' power, also recognized his worth. He could not kill the man who had saved his kingdom, so he allowed Thales to remain a star traveler, a quiet force beneath the throne. Years later, the event became known as the Eclipse of Thales, the first scientifically predicted eclipse in human history, and one that changed the course of war. Thales never built an empire or wrote grand scriptures, but one night, through the language of the stars, he shook the foundations of ancient belief and proved that knowledge could defeat fear. King Alyattes gained peace, the priests lost their monopoly over the heavens, and the world took its first step toward a new era, one where calculation could rival myth. Thales would be remembered not only as an astronomer, but as the star traveler who changed the course of human history.